I'll just start this whole presentation with a couple points in mind. For one thing, this term GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. You might not call it GRC. You might call it ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. Gartner's got their IRM, which I've got issues with. You can follow in the LinkedIn world out there if you want to see that. You might not even have a name for it. But every organization on the planet, everyone in this room is doing GRC today, whether you use that term or not. I don't think one of your organizations are going to say, we don't govern the organization, we don't manage risks, we can care less about compliance. You all have some approach to GRC within your organization, within your processes, within your ERP systems like SAP. You have some approach to governance, risk management, and compliance. Whether you call it GRC or you don't even have a name for it, you're doing GRC in some function today. And the question is, how can you make it more efficient, effective, and agile? How can you increase your maturity? And with the big focus on the agility piece there, how do we make it agile in today's dynamic, distributed, and complex business environment? That's the challenge. So I'll start with an analogy. Anybody who's heard my presentations over the last 10 years has probably heard me use this reference point before, because I use it a lot. But your organization is the Titanic. 1912, the Titanic is built and it goes on its maiden voyage. Front page of the newspaper said the Titanic was unsinkable, yet it sank on its maiden voyage. Overconfidence in the ship's design. How often are we too overconfident in our business? We don't hire bad people. They don't do bad things. They don't make mistakes. No, it happens all the time. Overconfidence. Yet overconfidence in the ship's design, not just by the press, the front page of the newspapers, but by the captain himself. Never in all history have we harnessed such formidable technology. Every scientific advancement known to man has been incorporated into its design. The operational controls are sound and foolproof. Captain E.J. Smith also stated, "I never saw a wreck and never have been wrecked, nor was I ever in a predicament that threatened to end in a disaster. I cannot conceive of any vital disaster happening to this vessel." How often does that characterize our organization? We're senior management executives. They don't care what's going on in the SAP world. We have good people. We're doing fine here. We don't need to pay attention to that. But things fail. Overconfidence. You had many other factors that bore down on the Titanic that resemble your organization. There's external environmental factors. It just so happens in 1912, there's already some period of climate change happening, and the northern Arctic ice shelf is breaking up, and icebergs are coming further south into the Atlantic. Not only that, the tidal moon poles of January, February, March 1912 were of a stronger nature, creating more hazards of icebergs in the shipping lanes than were normally there, because of the tidal moon poles bringing those icebergs into the shipping lanes. External environmental factors. You have those external environmental factors. Whether it's regulations like the South Africa's Privacy Act. You've got GDPR from the EU and things like that impact personal information that can be found in our ERP systems and things. You have external environmental factors and changes out there, the regulatory environment, the risk environment that impact your organization just like the Titanic did. We're in South Africa, huge focus on mining operations and natural resources. The Titanic had a very similar risk to what a lot of South African companies do, health and safety risk. There wasn't the proper number of life preservers and lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. You do the math, add it up, people had time to get off the ship, they didn't have anywhere to go, they didn't have the safety equipment. They told us that the size of the rudder and propeller were massively undersized for the huge ship that it was. It wasn't as navigable in the waters because they undersized the rudder and propeller. Or do we have the right capital reserves in place for the risk exposure the organization faces? Third-party risks. Your organizations today, half of your insiders are no longer employees. They're third parties. There's contractors, consultants, temporary workers, brokers, agents, dealers, intermediaries, suppliers, vendors, outsourcers, service providers. Half of our, what we call insiders, are not employees. They are third parties, or even maybe 75% of our operations could be. Where does the organization even start and stop anymore? The people that have access to the ERP systems and things, they're not all employees, they're third parties. I could think of a major global EU bank, European Union Bank, that is requiring everybody in its data centers to go through the same policies and training that their employees do. And if you think about a bank, over half the people in its data centers are not employees. They are outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, and temporary workers. They have to go through the same policies and training, particularly on GDPR, that the employees do. Where does the organization start and stop? Now, the Titanic had third-party issues. And so it just so happens that the iron ore used in the rivets to hold the seams of the ship together was of a brittle and inferior quality. Third-party issues. They had oversight functions. Like many of you in the room, you represent the second or maybe even third lines of defense. We can talk about the 3 lines of defense. The Titanic had that second line of defense, the operations oversight of the ship, just like you're overseeing the SAP environments in your organizations. In fact, the Titanic was getting telegraphs from other ships in the area saying, warning, icebergs are in the area. One of the responses back from the Titanic was, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. How often are we seeing that in our organizations? GDPR, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Ignorance. It's happening. This second line of defense also had technology to scan the oceans for hazards like icebergs. Just so happens in 1912, that technology was called binoculars. The crew member that had the key to the cabinet where the binoculars was kept was assigned duty to another ship right before it set sail and took the keys with them. They didn't have access to the binoculars. How often have we deployed some type of technology like Soterion to manage a little piece of risk in the SAP environment that could be doing so much more throughout the environment? We're not using it, or it's being used in a limited way. Lastly, the Titanic was headed towards an iceberg. It was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. If it would have hit it dead on, only 2 compartments would have flooded. When it decided to try to navigate, remember the rudder and propeller were undersized and massive size of the ship, so it was not as navigable in the waters. Combined with the weak iron ore in the rivets, the seams of the ship ripped wide open, 6 compartments flooded and the ship sank. It was a multifaceted risk environment that contributed to the disaster of the Titanic. And that's your organization today. It's your organization in the SAP environment. When we deal with things like inherited rights issues and employees that have been there 10 years and have moved from one role to another and have all these different rights and things, it's a complex, intricate risk environment. And we need to be able to understand and see the details of these risk relationships. The Titanic, if you would have addressed any one of those risk areas by itself, you might not have even had the disaster of the Titanic. But it's all those individual little things that contributed to the disaster of the Titanic. That's the exact same thing that's happening on a broad operational risk scale in organizations, but more specifically on a risk scale in the ERP environment as well. The intricate interrelationship of risks and understanding transactions and configurations of the SAP environment, inherited rights issues, segregation of duties and things, so that we can prevent those disasters. The little things matter. Now, we have a lot of change happening. Volumes and volumes of legal and regulatory change in our environments. And in fact, if you're a financial services firm operating around the world, there are 220 regulatory change events every business day impacting financial services firms. That's a lot. But all of our industries are being impacted by regulatory change, whether it's things like anti-bribery and corruption laws around the world, to UK's senior managers and certification regime, and which has copycat regulations like Australia's BEAR regulation, Hong Kong's managers in charge regulations, Ireland's senior executive accountability regulation, to Singapore's proposed accountability regulation. I mean, there's a lot of accountability things happening out there too, and I can get into that as well. That really puts a lot of focus on senior managers and directors being ultimately accountable, where they can be personally fined for failures in risk compliance and controls. Lots of change in the external risk environment, from changing market forces and economic conditions to geopolitical risks. The USA, where I'm from, I mean, whatever's being said from the Twitter feed from our president and things can definitely become a geopolitical risk. The moment that it's out, we're seeing geopolitical risks out there left and right, and tariffs and sanctions and everything else out there. That impacts our organizations. Competitive and industry, society, and technology changes impact our organization. But then we have changes to our internal environment, changes in strategy and process and technology. The employees that came in and they get rights into our ERP system. But as they go about their jobs and roles, they get more and more rights. And we have inherited rights issues and segregation of duty issues. You have the third-party relationships with business partners and consultants and contractors and outsourcers and service providers getting access into our ERP systems. And then mergers and acquisitions come and they bring in completely redundant ERP systems and processes and controls and environments that we have to harmonize at some point. Sometimes they go on indefinitely and until somebody realizes just what a mess there is. In fact, on the area of policies, our written corporate policies, one healthcare organization I was interacting with, they acquired 20-some hospitals over the last 28 hospitals over the last 20 years, about got that backwards. They have 18,000 policy and procedure documents now. Because every hospital comes in with a completely redundant sets of policies and procedures. And after 20 years, they realize we have a mess. The challenge with this isn't just these individual areas of regulatory change and external risk change and business change, but it's keeping all this change in sync with each other. I can devote a ton of resources to be knowledgeable about the law and know all the details about changes in the law and how it impacts my organization, but does that make me compliant? No, if the business back here has changed and we're still not compliant, it doesn't matter how intelligent we are about the law. Is it operationally compliant? Can we check the check boxes and prove and validate compliance in the organization? In the context of change, that becomes the critical matter, is keeping all this change in sync. And understanding and realizing that those little things matter in the organization. That we need to be able to understand and see this intricate web of relationships. It's what we call chaos theory, where the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes that has this cascading and growing impact that can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Last week's Hurricane Dorian, maybe it started with the flutter of a butterfly's wings in the Netherlands. And it cascaded and grew and grew and grew. Those little things matter. That inherited rights issues, that segregation of duties issue, that configuration issue in the SAP can have a big impact on the organization and big exposure. When you talk about GDPR and fines, I was just floored when I was doing an analysis of some of the impacts of some of the fines coming out of the EU, mainland Europe, compared to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is taking fines much more seriously than the mainland Europe is, at a staggering amount. Because you'll see a lot of these fines for, a couple 100,000 to a few million in the EU, and then you see these fines coming out of the United Kingdom for like 500 million pounds. Significant impacts. But GDPR and all these things are creating little things that in our ERP systems and things, and access to this information that we have to protect because they could become big fines. You look at the JP Morgan whale disaster, multiple $billion fine on JP Morgan, impact on JP Morgan. That was multiple $1 billion. I think it was $4 billion. One of the significant contributing factors to a multi-billion-dollar impact was a spreadsheet error. A simple spreadsheet error. The little things matter. Leonardo da Vinci said, realize that everything connects to everything else. But in that context, how do we manage risk and compliance and controls in the SAP world? A lot of times it's with a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. It's like Hercules battling the Hydra. Hercules had many battles to fight. One was against the multi-headed dragon, the Hydra, and he cut off one of its heads, and multiple heads grows up in its place. Trying to manage internal controls in our environment, in our ERP environments, and document spreadsheets and emails is a recipe for disaster. It takes a lot of time to consolidate information and report on it. I was talking to one organization that was spending 200 FTE hours to build a compliance and control report for the board of directors. 200 FTE hours, full-time equivalent employee hours. One person, 5 weeks of time just to build one report on an annual basis on controls. That's significant. I was talking to a mid-sized bank. They did an internal study and found out that 80% of their internal control and audit resources was nothing more than document reconcilers. 80% of their staff time was spent trying to manage and report on thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. That's significant. Trying to manage this in manual processes with documents, spreadsheets, and emails is a recipe for disaster, certainly not agile. And we're certainly not managing things at that point. If once a year it takes us 200 FTE hours to build a report, what's happening during those 12 months? We're not seeing things in a dashboard view to say, we've got a growing problem here. Alerts going off. Here's the early warning indicator. Let's address this before it becomes a big issue. When you're spending 200 FTE hours to build a report once a year for the board, At that time, you're reactive, you're firefighting, you're not managing and being proactive. It reminds me of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. This is a huge mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. You calculate inflation, that's one expensive house today. Now, this mansion had 147 different builders. It took 38 years to build and had no blueprint, no design, and no architect. It has staircases that go up or down to nowhere. Doors that open to 20-foot drops, doors that open to walls. Skylights that are in floors instead of ceilings. It's got 10,000 windows. What I just described is your GRC program in your organization. Over the last 38 years, you've had 147 different builders that have been doing their own thing without stepping back and say, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better design for this? That they've approached it with their little view of the world without thinking big picture. And how can we architect and design this and leverage technology to make this agile in our organization? So all this time, we're just hoping that nothing fails. We're like the guy that's on a bicycle on a tightrope juggling. We've got all of our little document spreadsheets and emails we're juggling and things and trying to keep up with the dynamic and changing regulatory risk and business environment, and employees are constantly changing and new ones are coming in. Others are changing roles and departments and things. And we have a mess. And trying to manage this and manual processes and approaches just leads to disaster. And there's lots of technology out there as well. And not all technology is built the same way. Sometimes, you get into these environments and you deploy what Gartner and Forrester love for GRC technology, and it takes 2 to 3 years to implement and build out in your environment. And it's not intuitive. We need agile approaches to GRC technology, whether it's from a broad enterprise GRC strategy to GRC specifically in the SAP environment. We need agile technologies that can adapt to a changing business environment, that are intuitive and engaging, not only for the back office of GRC functions like us in the room, but as well as the front office of the business that have to, receive, provide for access requests and things like that. We need agile technology. We need to be able to see the tree as well as the forest. That individual risk and control, as well as the interconnectedness of risks and controls. I do a lot of workshops, and tomorrow I'm actually doing a risk management by design workshop here in Johannesburg. In my risk workshop, I have had a couple global banks that have challenged me specifically on this slide. They say, this is great. We understand we need to be able to see the tree as well as the forest, that individual risk as well as the interconnectedness of risk. But they said, the reality is in our environments, we need to see the leaf as it connects to the branch, and the branch as it connects to the tree. It's not just about the tree and the forest. In our ERP environment, it's not just about understanding the access. We need to be able to see all the rights and issues related to that role and be able to get down to the details, the leaves and the branches. And you need agile technology to be able to leverage and see that and be able to make this a proactive and not a reactive firefighting process. So we're in the midst of a lot of change. We're seeing a past that focused on either A, document spreadsheets and emails and manual processes, or B, what I call the BMS of GRC, the complex, costly software that takes 2 to 3 years to implement. That's the past. The future is agile technologies. I was doing an analysis of a lot of the RFPs I've been involved in and interacted with on GRC technology. And those that Gartner and Forrester love so much and then often put in the upper right in their magic quadrants and waves, for every dollar you spend on software licensing, you're spending between $3 and $5 in implementation costs for those so-called leaders up there in the upper right of Gartner and Forrester in their top recommendations. Well, there's a whole range of solutions out there that don't get the same coverage, and the Big Four don't like them as much because the Big Four like a lot of their consulting revenues and things like that, so they like the 2 to 3 year engagements. For every dollar you spend on software licensing for those outside of the leaders area, you're typically spending 50 cents to $1.50 on implementation costs. Significant difference. Agile technologies of the future. We need to be able to have this future where we can leverage and implement and integrate technologies quickly and adapt to a changing business environment. And when there is a new acquisition or a merger, we can integrate that company rather quickly and rapidly with our technologies. In fact, one of my favorite things that happened this last year, it was actually just a year ago, there was a LinkedIn post that described one of the leaders in Gartner's Magic Quadrant that they loved and they promote so much in GRC. They described their implementation of this leader in GRC as to the lyrics of the song Hotel California. That basically they're stuck and can't get out. That after $500,000 in software license, and it was $2 million in implementation costs, 3 years later, they're just getting some basic functionality working. That's not agile. That's costly. It's what I call the BMS of GRC, the cost, the complexity. And that's not what we need. There's a range of solutions like our host today, Soterion, that are providing for agile, intuitive, and engaging GRC experiences and enforcement in our ERP environments that has a much stronger value proposition and lower total cost of ownership than a lot of the other solutions out there in the market. So the future. The future also is holding greater accountability versus responsibility. Senior executives and directors, the line of business has got to take on more and more ownership. And we need to be able to communicate in ways that the business understands through intuitive interfaces and engaging user experiences that can communicate what the access risk is in our environment that the line of business and business operations and management can understand and own. If they're going to own the risk, they have to understand the risk. And if we're communicating in technical SAP jargon and terms and things that the line of business, goes right past them over their heads, we're not accurately communicating that access risk to them. In order to provide greater accountability upon the line of business, we need engaging, intuitive, intelligent GRC experiences that the line of business, the front lines of the organization can understand and work with. That becomes critical. Now, what GRC is all about, the fastest cars not only have great engines, they got good brakes and steering. If you want to drive a high-performing car and you want to go 120 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, whatever it might be, I'm going to care about the brakes and steering as much as I care about the engine. I want to make sure that car stays on the road, right? And doesn't fly off. We need good handling. At the end of the day, that's what GRC is about. It's about the handling of the organization. We want the organization to be high-performing. We want to exceed our goals and our objectives and our performance objectives. I don't think any one of us wants to hinder the organization. We want it to do it in a way that is safe and keeps it on the road. So that gets us to the definition of GRC. That GRC, by the official definition found in the OSEC GRC capability model, is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function. The reliable achievement of objectives, whether they're entity-level objectives, division objectives, department objectives, process objectives, or asset objectives. You play a role in all of that. The SAP, the ERP environment, plays a critical role in reliably achieving the organization's objectives and performance because we put controls in there so we can reliably achieve those objectives. If we did not have controls in our environment, everything can go in a lot of different directions, and all of a sudden the organization's in a lot of hot water. We have controls so that we can reliably achieve objectives, whether they're entity-level objectives, division, or even department-level objectives. But obviously, you also support process-level objectives, like the controls in the accounts payable process, or procurement, or accounts receivable. You also support asset-level objectives, like EU citizen data for GDPR, South African citizen data for like POPI and things like that. You help meet those asset level controls as well. We reliably achieve objectives, the governance function, while addressing uncertainty. That's risk management. ISO 31000 defines risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. There's a relationship there. We put controls in the environment so we can reliably achieve objectives. We put controls in the environment to mitigate risk. We also put controls in the environment for compliance purposes to act with integrity. So your role and function crosses all elements of GRC. We implement internal controls, access risk controls, and things in the SAP environment to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. Therefore, we need to be able to collaborate and understand the range of controls in our environment and how they all interact and work together to meet those risks. and that we have different departments that can collaborate and work together. All of us in the room are coming more from the SAP ERP world, but we have a broad range of operational controls. We got policies not only over the accounts payable process, we have other policies like HR policies and IT policies and other accounting policies and things. There's a lot of other elements and things that we can work together collaboratively in our environment because it is an interconnected world. When we deal with something like a fraud risk, a corruption risk, it's not just about the SAP environment, but it's about human behavior out there and how they're interacting. It's about awareness of policies and controls and compliance. We need to understand the interconnectedness of our individual roles into the big picture of GRC as well as it traverses across the enterprise view of things that goes beyond the ERP world as well. This means we need to be able to bring together an enterprise strategy that starts with the overall GRC management strategy from the top down. A good strategy is going to start off with a charter. And in part of a charter, if we're going to get different departments working together, is to have a vision and mission statement. I recommend the one I just referenced from the definition of GRC with OSEG, that at XYZ Corporation, say that's our company's name for now, at XYZ Corporation, GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. Therefore, we are managing controls throughout our environment and deep into the SAP environment and with areas of concern like access risk. From there, we define our common processes. What are the common processes to provision users in the ERP environment? What's the common processes to review those access rights that are given? How do we give out emergency access to individuals? What are all those common predefined processes and how do we define those in our environment? From there, what's the information technology environment to automate and support this and make this proactive and not reactive? Because up till now, you just take the first two, you can have a lot of manual processes in your environment that can really be slowed down because of documents, spreadsheets, and email and cannot become proactive because they're too reactive and time consuming. How can we leverage information technology to make this proactive? So we're not firefighting, we're preventing fires. We need technology that is engaging to bring GRC to the front lines of the organization. It's not just about the second and third line of defense, it's also about the first line of defense. We talk about the first line of the three line of defense model, the third line of defense being audit and assurance, the second line of defense being internal controls and risk managers in the organization. The first line of defense is usually defined as operational management. I say it's much more than that. It's all the way down to the frontline employees. They're making risk and control decisions every day. The teller at the bank, the insurance agent out there in the field, the doctor or nurse at a hospital. We need engaging user experiences, not just for the back office of GRC, but we need intuitive, engaging user experiences that communicate risk and controls in a business context for the first lines of defense, the front office of GRC. We need the ability to collaborate and be able to interact with the line of business as well as the second and third lines of defense functions as well. And we need to be able to operationalize. If we're managing things in documents, spreadsheets, and emails, we can't get those early warning indicators and those dashboards and reports and contain something when still a small something before it becomes a very big something. We need to be able to operationalize and see those early warning indicators, key risk indicators and things like that, and be able to see an issue when it's still a small issue, we can contain it before it becomes a big issue, and automate the GRC processes within our environment. We need to provide for innovation and leading agile GRC technologies that are easy to implement, that have a lower total cost of ownership. And we also need strong mobility and access, that we can communicate to the line of business on whatever format that they want to interact on, whether it's smartphones and tablets. We need to be able to leverage and interact on mobile devices for GRC as well, and communicate access requests or even have people request access requests on their smartphones when needed. How can we leverage and extend beyond traditional, laptops and desktops? This means we have to have a GRC information architecture that brings all this together, that we can understand the controls, the preventive, detective, and corrective controls in our SAP environment, and understand how those controls meet specific risks in our environment, how they relate to objectives, where do those controls apply? Are they entity-level controls, process controls, asset-level controls? A lot of us are dealing with process and asset controls. dealing with the segregation of duties and inherited rights issues and emergency user access issues and things like that within processes. But there's also asset level controls, like private personal information, GDPR related information, for example. How can we define that as an information asset in our SAP environments and be able to monitor the controls and access to individuals to that type of information asset? How do the controls map to certain regulatory obligations and reporting? How do the controls map to policies? You have a password policy that tells you passwords in the SAP environment will be 30 characters long from 5 character sets and change every 5 minutes. Those are all controls that get implemented in the configuration of your SAP environment. You have a gift entertainment policy that tells you the amount of a gift and frequency of a gift that can be given to any individual or entity over a period of time, particularly for concerns around bribery and corruption and things like that. Those are controls that can get configured and implemented in the SAP environment. The roles, who's the owner of the controls and the owner of the risk? Who's the subject matter expert on those controls? Issues, incidents, investigations, and cases. Those can point to where there's control issues and where we need controls or controls aren't working and failing. If we have an integrated process information and view into our control environment, we should have higher quality information that doesn't take 200 FTE hours to build one report, but that report's available at a push of a button, and within a minute we've got it. We can optimize our internal control processes. We can allocate our capital to where our risk exposure is the greatest, improve effectiveness of our internal control management, and protect the reputation and brand while making things more efficient. We should be able to see a lot of distributed and disconnected GRC data points in our SAP environment, integrate and relate those together, analyze, and build out the action items on next steps and things to take, and how do we react to what's going on. To be able to see the tree as in the forest, to be able to see the leaf and the branch in the tree as it connects to the forest. As Leonardo da Vinci stated, realize that everything connects to everything else. And to see those relationships of different rights that are granted to individuals and where do we have inherited rights issues and segregation of duty issues. So, as we prepare for our GRC journey, and we're all at different stages of maturity, some of you in the room might be using Soterion, you've been using it for years, and you could be the poster child of what a mature GRC capability is in an SAP environment. Others in the room, you might just be beginning some of your journey. You're still using a lot of documents, spreadsheets, emails, and manual processes. But no matter what, we're somewhere today. Where do we want to go? Is your organization prepared for the journey ahead? Where are we at today? What's the current environment? And start building out that roadmap of where we want to be. And is the organization ready for change? From there, careful planning is the key to success. Lay out your route ahead of time. So what is that current state analysis? What does internal controls in the SAP environment look like today? Where do we want to see it 3 years from now? And how are we going to get there? This is my favorite slide in the deck. This is actually, I have a lot of pictures and graphics you can see, but this one's actually a personal one. This is the Bob Marshall Wilderness in northwest Montana in the United States. That's where I grew up, is in Montana. One of the largest states in the United States by land mass, but one of the smallest when it comes to population. And this is the northwest corner. This is the largest inland wilderness area outside of Alaska. Alaska's got bigger wilderness areas. But outside Alaska, this is the largest inland wilderness area in the United States. And I grew up, about 30 miles from that. But what's really personal about this picture is my middle son, who's now 25, lives in the same place I grew up, and that's him pointing his way with his friends on a backpacking trip. So it's a personal slide. But as he's pointing the way, that's where we're headed, over to that mountain over there. How are we going to get there? Where are we at today? We're here on this mountain. We want to get to that mountain. How are we going to get there? What does internal controls in your SAP environment look like today, and how is it being managed? And how can we make it more efficient, effective, and agile over the next 2 to 3 years? And what's the right strategy and roadmap to get there? The next question is, conditioning is critical. Is your team ready? Are they willing to work together? Are there holdouts and people that just don't want to collaborate and work? From there, you have to understand that you just don't go on a major expedition, and just you think you're going to climb Mount Everest in a day with one you just, sprint up and back down. It doesn't work that way. What are the stages to get there? What do we want to accomplish in the first 6 months, in the second 6 months, second year? And most critically, you want to select the right equipment for the journey. You don't just throw everything in a bag. You carefully select your equipment for the task. What's the right solution that's not only going to solve your problems today, but the solution that can grow with you and be agile as your business expands and grows over the next 3 years and be able to fulfill your vision for tomorrow? Do you have that agile technology in place? Now, the way I define agile GRC technologies is, first off, usability. Usability for the back office GRC functions of the second and third line of defense, but usability also for the front line, the first line of defense. What's the cost of ownership? What's the cost not only for the software license, but the cost to own and maintain it and configure it? How easily configurable is it? Is it scalable for our environment? Is it adaptable as our business changes? Is it easy to integrate and work with into the SAP environments? Does it provide the right level of analytics and reporting? What's the vision for artificial intelligence and robotic process automation within the solution? And future-proof, when we get to upgrades, is it like a whole new, brand new implementation? Or is it something that's easily upgraded in the environment that goes seamlessly? So in the end here, a strong, agile GRC approach to make us more aware of our environment, more aware of SAP and access risks, but in that context, also more aware how that integrates and impacts other broader risks such as fraud and corruption and internal controls over financial reporting. That we can align our resources, we can be more responsive to issues and identify them when they're still small issues before they become bigger issues. We can become agile, and agile is not just about being fast, it's about being nimble and quick in your environment, and more resilient and lean. So with that, that's my introductory comments. I do want to mention that I recently evaluated Soterion against a lot of other solutions in the market. And there's a variety of awards I do. I do user experience awards, I do value awards, and I do innovation awards, which technology innovation awards are more about the guts of a software solution, while the user experience awards are more about the interface of a solution. And this year, 2019, has been the focus on the user experience awards. And I've got 17 different categories, and one of those categories is automated continuous control management solutions. And out of all the different nominations, I recognize Soterion for having one of the strongest interfaces out there for both the back office and the front office of internal control management and automation in the environment.